fire at Harrenhal, the seated House Strong in 120 AC, claimed the life of its lord, Lyonel Strong, the then hand of the king, and his eldest son and heir, Harwin Strong, the rumoured lover of Rhaenyra Targaryen and father of children. House of the Dragon makes it very clear how events play out, with Harwin's younger brother, Larys Strong, arranging the fire, and thus the death of his father and brother, to become Lord of Harrenhal and gain favour with Alicent Hightower, the Queen, by having her rival's lover killed. There is no question in House of the Dragon that Larys is responsible. He plainly admits it himself, and the viewer clearly sees the efforts to arrange the killings. But in Fire and Blood, the book that House of the Dragon is based on, the real cause of the fire and subsequent deaths of Lyonel and Harwin are a huge mystery, with no clear or definitive answers. Given the nature of Fire and Blood and the accounts of the events coming from three sources with differing views and bias and opinions, the answers put forward are speculation or logical guesses based off rumours surrounding the events. The view that most people in the world go with is that it was simply the famous curse of Harrenhal, and which is an unfortunate accident. But Fire and Blood does put forward 4 prime suspects, with some fans even suggesting some others. The first, and the one I will go into least detail about here, is Larys Strong, the suspect the show went with. In the book, it is made very clear fast that Larys is a schemer, in the same vein as Littlefinger and Varys, albeit with an approach and style all of his own. Larys, a crippled second son of House Strong, stood to gain a lot from his brother and father's death, with it elevating him to Lord of Harrenhal. The show also takes the approach that he also murdered his brother as a way to win the favour of Alicent Hightower by killing Rhaenyra's lover and the rumoured father of her children. But in the book, there is no proof or indication this was any sort of motive for Larys. It should also be noted at this point that in the book, while it's heavily implied that Jace, Luke and Joffrey are Harwin's sons, not Laenor's, it is not as obvious as the show makes it, with a lot more plausible deniability. For example, Laenor and House Velaryon being light-skinned with traditional Velaryon purple eyes, and also the fact that Rhaenys, Laenor's mother, had Baratheon black hair, as well as the fact we're not actually quite sure the known hair colour of Aemma Arryn. It is vital to remember the show is the show, the books are the books, each with their own canon and timelines. While the show has gone with Larys as the murderer, it does not mean that he is the murderer in Fire and Blood, and that leaves the mystery wide open. Personally, I like some of the other options, which are much more compelling character-wise than Larys. Daemon Targaryen is the first big suspect. While there is not any tangible evidence he was involved, the year this all occurs is important as to why he's a big suspect, 120 AC. In this year, he finally marries Rhaenyra after the death of his previous wife, Laena, earlier in the year, but he's also prime suspect behind another death in 120 AC, that of Rhaenyra's husband, Laenor Velaryon, who was killed in a brawl with his supposed lover, Kyle Corey, in the middle of the day in a busy market in Spice Town. And yes, in book canon, I'm pretty sure that Laenor is dead. There was no burned body, and it was all very public. This removes a huge obstacle in his pursuit of Rhaenyra, and also puts him in the frame for the murder of Harwin, with the logic being he was removing another obstacle or possible threat for Rhaenyra's affections. He definitely had the motive, and if you believed he was behind the death of Laenor as well, we know he has the power and knows the right people to get something like this done. While there is no concrete evidence for his involvement in either murder, the fact that both happened in 120 AC and cleared his path to Rhaenyra is very suspicious to say the least. Next up on our suspect list is Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake. The theory put forward in Fire and Blood is Corlys used his immense wealth and influence to arrange the assassination of Harwin Strong for cuckolding his son and fathering Rhaenyra's children. Unlike the show, we don't really know much about the relationship between Corlys and Laenor, or how and even if he knew the truth about Laenor's sexuality. But the thought is he simply had Harwin killed as revenge, not just for the cuckolding of his son and heir, but in principle destroying the union of House Targaryen and Velaryon, merging the two rival claims to the throne, while also having his own bloodline and grandson become king. If Jace, Luke and Joffrey are Harwins, while Corlys cannot publicly make these accusations, he could take this form of revenge. However, one thing that I think does go against this logic is there is no evidence in Fire and Blood that Corlys has any dislike for the kids, and if anything he treats them relatively well compared to how most would if they were baseborn. While I don't think this show impacts the canon of the books much, it does seem that Corlys is at peace or accepts the fact his bloodline won't sit the throne. His name will, but his blood won't. I do think Corlys is one of the more least likely suspects. King Viserys is also a prime suspect. Due to the nature of Fire and Blood, we are only really told of how other people view his actions, and we don't get his internal monologue. Viserys is often painted as a fool who who buried his head in the sand when it came to the accusations of Rhaenyra and the parentage of her children. However, I don't agree with this assessment. He was an idiot. I think he publicly supported his daughter and actively suppressed the idea her sons were Harwins simply because the lads were still his grandsons, whom he cared for and loved. But I'm of the belief that deep down he did know the truth, and rightly or wrongly turned a blind eye. The theory goes that Viserys had Harwin killed in an effort to suppress the rumours that kept surrounding Harwin and Rhaenyra and the legitimacy of his grandsons. While this is a compelling idea, other than some very circumstantial motives, I can't really see anything in Fire and Blood that gives any solid leads Viserys could be involved. Also consider this: Lyonel Strong, Harwin's father, by all accounts was a decent man and a good hand of the king. Would Viserys really have wanted such a valuable asset to the kingdom killed? Those are the suspects as stated in Fire and Blood. However, after taking a deep dive into Reddit and Twitter, I found 3 other common fan suspects. However, there really is not much evidence for them, just that they have motive. First is Otto, with the idea being he was actually targeting Lyonel and not Harwin, as if he ever wanted to get his position of Hand of the King back, Lyonel, who by all accounts was doing a good job, was going to have to be removed. Some also think Alicent could have done it, simply killing Harwin to get back at Rhaenyra for having bastards. My issue with this one, however, is people seem to be projecting Alicent from the show into Alicent from the book. When doing so is a bit tricky, given the different canons and level of characterization we get in each source. We lastly have those who think Criston Cole killed Harwin as revenge for what went down between him and Rhaenyra. The thing that's tricky here is in terms of the book, we don't know what really happened between Cole and the princess, so even if this is the motive, it's very flimsy at best. Again, another case of the show retroactively being projected on the books. For me, it makes a lot of sense why House of the Dragon chose to go with Larys being the one behind it all. Larys has very little to do in Season 1, but will play a big role later, so needed something to help establish him. The Harrenhal fire is a perfect example of this. Also, in terms of book canon, it's also the most straightforward answer. I do think the idea, at least in the book, that Daemon did it has just as much evidence. I low-key also do love the idea Viserys was involved, despite the lack of evidence for it. I think in terms of his book character, it would flesh him out and kind of help us understand his actions a bit more and the choices that he made. But all in all, I do think Larys makes the most sense, both in the book and in the show. But the Harrenhal fire and the multiple suspects is kind of why I like Fire and Blood for what it is. It lets the reader interpret the text in a way that they think fits. However, the show does not have that luxury, therefore had to make a choice that would fit the narrative of the story they were telling. And for them, Larys made perfect sense.